So I guess I'll go ahead and get started. I've done a couple of podcasts now about coronavirus, but I haven't focused on anything related to sports and coronavirus. And this was really interesting for me to dig into. I contacted some of my doctor friends in New York and tried to get as much information I could about how professional leagues in the US are handling this. And I was communicating with a tennis and basketball doctor in Spain as well to get information about what's going on. So really, I just want to introduce myself, talk a little bit about the virus itself. How do we stay safe? What do we do if we get sick? And then special issues for athletes, which is probably, most interesting to you guys. And maybe it's something that people are still trying to wrap their heads around. A lot of people don't know what to do yet, even some of the professionals I talked to about this. So just to introduce myself, I have a PhD in epidemiology from University of Alabama at Birmingham. My dissertation was actually about pitching injuries in children, and the pitching limits for Little League Baseball, the pitch count limits, were actually a result of the research that I did in graduate school. And then I ended up joining the Hospital for Special Surgery in New York, which is the team hospital for the Mets, Knicks, Rangers, Nets, Giants, and the US Olympic team. So it's the highest volume orthopedic hospital that does the most surgery of any orthopedic hospital in the world. And a lot of innovation has happened there and that sort of thing. And I've been really fortunate to work with those surgeons for most of my career. And through these opportunities, I've been able to work with the Tampa Bay Rays, the New York Mets, which I mentioned earlier, Major League Soccer. And I do a lot of work currently with the International and Japanese Sports Medicine Societies to try to understand a lot of what happens with athletes and how we can take care of you guys better if you get hurt. I'm also an associate professor at Cornell University, the medical school in Manhattan. And then I'm currently actually based in Fukuoka, Japan, where I'm a lecturer at Kyushu University. And I work remotely for the hospital and the university in New York. The kinds of work that I do allows me to do that, where I don't have to be on campus. I don't have to be in the hospital to do my job. So as I mentioned before, I'm not an infectious disease epidemiologist, but I studied a lot of this in school. I was actually in New York for some meetings when the outbreak started there. And it went from, while I was there for two and a half weeks, it went from 1 case to 600 in New York itself. And now today I looked it up, it's 150,000 cases only 3 weeks later. So in 5 weeks, it went from the first infection to 150,000. And New York now, if it was a country, would be the second highest in the world in infections. It just passed Italy and Spain today. So New York is getting devastated. So let's keep any friends or family we have back home in mind. And then I have a caveat here, and that's that there's still a lot we don't know about this virus, and so there's new information coming out all the time. So some of this information may be out of date in just a few weeks, but maybe we can do these periodically or something like that to try to keep everybody up to date the best we can. About the virus itself, the novel coronavirus. So novel means new. We've never seen it before in humans before December in Wuhan, China. So our body doesn't know how to fight it. Our immune system doesn't even recognize this virus as something that's attacking us. And as a result, there's a delay before the immune system realizes it's under attack. And so that's why you might be contagious. You might have the virus and you might be getting other people sick before you're even showing that you're sick, because your immune system hasn't started to fight back. And then it's when the immune system really kicks into overdrive that the serious symptoms can happen. And that's where the virus is so into your lungs that your immune system starts attacking your lungs themselves. And that's where the really serious complications come from. That happens in a relatively small percentage of people, but that's how serious this virus is. And because we don't have any immunity, our body can't fight it off naturally. The good news is about 20% of people who are infected actually don't show any symptoms. That's good news for those 20%. It's bad news for trying to stop people from getting sick, because if you don't know that you're infected and you're in contact with other people, you can get them sick. And that's where it's really difficult to control this. And it's really highly contagious. So it mostly comes very much like the flu. It comes through water droplets from your saliva or spit, especially if you cough or sneeze. And those droplets can stay in the air for up to 3 hours if there's not good ventilation. and the virus itself can survive on hard surfaces. If those water droplets land on plastic or metal, they can survive there for up to 3 days, the virus can. So this is where the whole thing about wash your hands, don't touch your face, and social distancing comes in. You want to stay away from those infected droplets. And all of these things help us do that. Currently, there is no cure, but most people can recover on their own. Just like most of us can fight off the flu. We feel miserable, but then after a week or two, we're starting to feel better. This is the same way. Some people do need to be hospitalized. And then the other thing is that this virus is actually killing more people than the flu. So in 2018, about 1 out of 1,000 people in America died of the flu. If they got the flu, about 1 out of 1,000 people who got infected died. Almost all of those were in the elderly. Those are all old people, a vast majority of them. In COVID-19 and this infection, it's about 2%, so about 20 in 1,000. Instead of 1 in 1,000, it's 20 in 1,000. So it's killing 20 times more people among those who get infected. In fact, in Italy, it's about 127 out of 1,000. It's killing at a much higher rate in Italy because their healthcare system has collapsed. They don't have enough beds, they don't have enough resources to take care of people. For younger people, which of course as athletes you are, about 2 in 10,000 young people died of the flu in 2018. But in COVID-19, that's about 30 in 1,000. So it's about 15 times more likely to kill you than the flu. Now it's still very low risk for young people, but it's a much higher risk than the flu. So just to give you a sense that even though you're young and you're strong and you're in good shape, doesn't necessarily mean that if you get it, you're gonna be okay. And there's another part of that, which I'll talk about when we get to athlete issues, that I want to talk about. So as far as how we can stay safe, one is social isolation, and that means stay home as much as you can. If you're going to be out interacting with other people, try to keep at least 6 feet or 2 meters apart. I would recommend you avoid crowded indoor spaces if you can. And then if you can get one, or if you can find some sort of face guard, wear a mask when you're in public. It doesn't need to be an N95. We should really let healthcare workers have those. But if you have something to block the possibility of those water droplets reaching your mouth or your nose, you're less likely to get infected. Also, if you're infected but don't know it, you're less likely to spread it. And what wearing a mask has helped me with is we touch our face all the time. Humans, we touch our faces like hundreds of times a day, and we're not even aware of it. But having a mask on keeps us from doing that so much. So early on when this started, when we had our first cases in Japan back in January, I started wearing a mask if I was taking the subway, and I realized that how often I was touching my face. And so I learned from wearing a mask not to touch my face. So when I'm out in public now, I do not touch my face. Another thing is, when you're out in public, especially now that the community spread seems to have started in Japan, community spread means that there are now people infected that the healthcare system doesn't know about, right? They're not in hospitals, the public health people haven't found them. So assume anyone you meet in public has the infection. And that's why you need to maintain that distancing. That's why you need to be wearing a mask. And the other thing you should do is try not to touch surfaces in public. I'll actually walk further from my apartment to go to a convenience store that has automatic doors, rather than the one closer where I have to push the door open, right? And that's a nice thing about Japan, is there's a lot of automatic doors. So do your shopping where you don't need to touch that door to get inside. And then the next step is really cleanliness is next to godliness. We've heard that expression since we were kids. You know, like I said, most people touch their face hundreds of times a day. Break that habit. Just learn not to touch your face. And whenever you get home, or whenever you're out in public and have the opportunity, wash your hands with soap and water. I know a lot of Japanese public bathrooms don't have soap. Carry a little bit of soap with you, a little soap dispenser or something. And then what I do now is, if I go out to go shopping or run errands or whatever, when I come home, I change clothes immediately. Those dirty clothes go right in the laundry. I don't rewear them if they've been outside. And then if you can, shower after you get home. Right? Because that virus may have settled on other parts of your face, or it might have been settled on your hair, might have settled on the back of your neck. You don't know. It's unlikely, but it's just one more way to protect yourself. So showering after you get home is a good idea. And then anything that you bring home, if you either go out shopping and bring things home, or you have things delivered, imagine that there is virus on those items and wash them. So I have a routine now where I wash everything that I bring into the house with soap and water. And if I can't do it with soap and water, I use an alcohol wipe to clean it off. And it's just a good habit to get into because it just keeps everything cleaner, right? And you're less likely to get sick. And then the other thing, which I think really applies to you guys, is build up your immune system. You're already in good physical shape, but a healthy diet. Eat as much fresh fruits and vegetables, and as some people say, shop the perimeter of the grocery store, the outside. You want to eat fresh meat, fresh fish, fresh vegetables, fresh fruits, fresh grains, right? Packaged stuff is convenient, it's easy, and we should have it because if we can't shop for a while, we've got something to eat. We're not going to starve. But try to eat healthy. That's really good for your immune system. And get as much sleep as you can. This is a really stressful time. People are scared. So it's easy to lose sleep. It's easy to just stay up, watching movies or whatever, but, get a good night's sleep. And then really stress can also hurt your immune system. So try to relax, do things you enjoy. Whatever that is, just do it. You like watching movies, you like playing video games, you like reading books, listen to music, just do things like that to relax. And then exercise is also good for the immune system, but there's a trick to this. It's exercise, but not too much, because if you work out too hard and too much, you can actually weaken your immune system temporarily, and that's where you're at higher risk of getting infected. So I'll talk a little bit about that later when I get into talking about athletes. But now I want to talk about if you get sick, right? So it's, there is a possibility that someone will get sick. And if you do, it's not necessarily a terrible thing. It's going to suck. But there's a few things that you should do. One is some of the early signs to know that you're starting to get sick is, for a lot of people, they're losing their sense of smell and their sense of taste. They can't smell anything. And that's really, really weird. That doesn't happen with the flu. So if you don't have any other symptoms, but suddenly you can't smell, you should really think that it's likely that you're infected, and that you may not actually get any more sick than that. You might not have any other symptoms, but that's where you need to be careful not to get other people sick. The other thing is there's often a fever. In fact, a large majority of people have a fever, and then a dry cough. And also a lot of people, which they didn't realize early on, a lot of people start with diarrhea. It actually ends up in the gut first. So you get some diarrhea, you got a fever, you got a dry cough, and then that's how it comes. So if this happens to you, stay home, rest, drink lots of fluids, and eat well as you can. Some other symptoms that may come on would be sore throat, body aches, and fatigue. You're just tired, you're exhausted, you don't have any energy, right? Again, stay home, rest, hydrate, eat well. Get those fluids, get that food in your system. That's going to help your immune system fight this off, right? So with all of those symptoms, you don't need to go to the hospital. You don't need to go see a doctor. Now, if you end up with a more serious symptom, which would be shortness of breath or chest pain, or almost like a heart attack feeling, these are more serious symptoms they're much less common, but they do happen. For shortness of breath, what I would recommend is, now while you're healthy, sit quietly and count how many breaths you need to take in a minute for a full 60 seconds. Just run a stopwatch and see how many breaths you take. Just count your breaths for 1 minute. And do that for a couple of minutes. See what your average number of breaths is. For most people, it's somewhere between 10 and 14 breaths a minute. That's average. If you end up getting sick and you have shortness of breath, if you get to about 20 breaths per minute, this is what you need to breathe. It's almost like you can't catch your breath. That's when it could be a medical emergency. That's when it's time to call somebody and try to get help. If you get to about 20 breaths per minute. But that'll depend on what your baseline is, right? What you're used to. So if you're used to 10 breaths a minute, then maybe 16 or 17 breaths a minute feels like a lot, right? However, if you do have shortness of breath, there's a trick that a lot of doctors have been using, and that's to get people to lie on their stomach. because apparently lying on your stomach can help relieve that shortness of breath and make it less likely that you need to go to the hospital. But if you feel at all uncomfortable, like you're having some sort of medical emergency, you know, definitely get your doctor on the phone, you know, or get to the hospital. But those are very low risk. It's very unlikely that this is going to happen for younger, healthy people, but it still is happening. So you just need to be aware what the signs are and what you should do if you do get sick. Then, you know, people ask, how long does it last? So first of all, about 90% of people, so 9 out of 10 people show symptoms within the first 5 days of infection. So after they're infected, within about 5 days, they're sick, if they're going to show symptoms. But then also most people start to recover within 5 days. And most of the people who get sick, it sucks. It's like a really bad flu. But after about 5 days, they start to feel better. And some people feel basically, other than being a little tired, they're back to normal by 7 or 8 days after they start to have symptoms. And that's the normal course. That's for most people. But then what's happening is some people crash in the second week. So they're starting to feel better. And then that's when the immune system kicks into overdrive and starts to attack the lungs. And that's when the shortness of breath can start. You know, that's when things can get serious. But people can still manage that at home. People still have been able to not have to go to the hospital or get medical care, even if they have that second week crash. So if you're feeling better after 5 or 6 days, you're feeling almost normal, don't rush back to your sport. Let that second week pass and see how you're feeling, right? I think that's an important thing. And then if for the severe cases, the serious cases, it can last up to about 3 weeks or more if you end up having a bad case. I'm sure some of you, I know it's happened to me where I've had the flu that feels like it lasts for a month, right? And that can happen with COVID-19 as well. And then something that you should know is even once you're feeling better, you still probably have the virus in you, and you potentially can make people sick for about 2 weeks after you feel better. So again, keep that social distance, wash your hands, and wear a mask if you're out in public. You don't want to get other people sick. That's the only way we're going to stop this thing, is that if people who are sick don't get anybody else sick. So even after you're feeling better, if you do get it, please just be careful and try not to get anybody else sick. All right, and then I'll just finish up here with special issues for athletes. And I'm not trying to scare you, but there is one special risk for athletes, and that's that if you have the serious version of this and you end up needing emergency medical care, there's the possibility of permanent lung damage. And I'm sure most of you, or probably all of you, know about VO2 max, right? That's your maximum lung capacity at effort. You may have permanent damage to your VO2 max, which could hinder your performance even after you recover. So it's best not to get sick. And if you do everything you can to try to manage your symptoms and get yourself healthy and make sure your immune system's strong to fight it off so that you don't end up in that situation. Because this is the very similar what happened with SARS and with MERS, which are a couple other outbreaks like this. There is the possibility of permanent lung damage in severe cases. It doesn't happen in everyone, but that is a possibility. So that's one reason why you just want to stay as safe as possible and not get sick. Special things to consider as athletes. One is cleanliness again, right? And so sanitize your equipment, right? Make sure that the team's taking care of using soap and water or alcohol to clean your equipment, because you guys are sharing it, right? So make sure that equipment is clean before you start practice and is cleaned again after practice, right? And then I would recommend restricting training to activities that do not require touching. And if you're throwing like a ball back and forth or doing some sort of catch and throw like that, wear gloves so that you're not actually touching the ball with your hands, right? If it's possible for your sport, it's sport dependent. And then of course, social distancing still matters, even on a team. And it's really hard to do in team sports, but that's where activities that don't require touching, if you can maintain some distance from each other, then that's an opportunity to limit spread. Like it was running through basketball teams in the NBA because there's so much close contact in basketball, right? Now there's the 2-meter rule, right? It's a 6 feet away from anybody else. Something to consider is that doesn't work when you're running, because that 2 meters is giving the virus, after somebody coughs or sneezes, that 2 meters gives that the air droplets time to drop. But if you're running through it, you're too close. So for running, there was a study that was just done in Europe that's suggesting if you're doing running sports, you should be 5 to 10 meters apart. Like if you're following each other, if you're running together, you should be 5 to 10 meters apart. Now you can run side by side, but you shouldn't follow, because once you're in that you're in the airstream behind somebody, if that person has the virus, that virus is in that airstream. So if you're running behind somebody, run off to the side or try to run alongside each other. And then for cycling, because obviously cycling is even faster than running. If you're a cyclist, it's about 15 to 30 feet. 15 to 30. This is a typo. 15 to 30 meters, or 30 to 60 feet apart for cyclists. And then if you have the opportunity with your sport, wear a mask and eye protection, because anything that keeps that virus from getting into contact with your eyes, your nose, or your mouth is going to help you prevent getting sick. So those are all some things you can do for social distancing while participating in your sports. And it's up to you guys. You can ask me questions later about your specific sports and we can talk through it. Another thing is training modification. This is what I talked about before, that if you are doing high intensity workouts, you can weaken your immune system and increase your risk of getting sick if you're exposed to the virus. So what's recommended currently is to exercise less than 60 minutes per session and at less than 80% of your max effort. Because if you go over that for a sustained period of time, that's when the research shows that your immune system can be weakened. So again, we can talk through that if you guys want to. And then as far as medical treatments, corticosteroids may make the symptoms worse, especially the lung symptoms. Corticosteroids are not the steroids that Barry Bonds used or whatever. Corticosteroids are actually medical treatments for injuries. So if you're undergoing treatment for an injury, you may not want to use corticosteroids. So have that conversation with your trainer or with your doctor. And then right now, this is very weak evidence, but Advil or ibuprofen is not recommended because there's some evidence that this again can help the virus take hold in the lungs. So you should consider using a different painkiller if you're trying to deal with pain. But that's very weak evidence, but we're sort of in a better safe than sorry stage right now, right? We'd rather avoid Advil if we can use something else. But if you're already on Advil and your doctor told you to take it, keep taking it, but maybe talk to your doctor about it. And then as far as return to sport after being sick, the current recommendations, as I understand them, there's 2 options. One is if you have 2 negative COVID-19 tests more than 24 hours apart, you should be safe to go back to your sport. And if you don't have tests available, then the other alternative is you need to wait those 2 weeks after your symptoms have resolved. That may end up being shorter, but right now everybody's being careful. So 14 days is what we're talking about, so about 2 weeks. It could be once we have more information that's reduced to 10 days, 7 days, 5 days or something. Right now, people are just being extra careful. So that's all I had as far as what I wanted to introduce, and I'm happy to just answer questions and that sort of thing.